Hi everyone, welcome back. This is the space that I use for my vegetable garden, and the first thing that people see when they walk in here is this really ugly green fence. Now the fence is meant to keep critters out when I'm growing things here, but today I want to build something that is going to be much nicer and again serve the same purpose.
So this is what I came up with in SketchUp. This is a bench that is supported by planters on each side. You can extend these as far as you like, and you can even change the layout. I would love to cut everything down first for this entire project, but I just don't have the room in my shop. So I'm going to start here by cutting all the pieces for the framing of the planter boxes. To do that, I'm going to be using pressure treated 2x4s.
Since I'm building a bunch of these, I'm going to build this up like an assembly line. So I'm going to build all my side panels first. To fasten the framing for this whole project, I'm going to be using decking screws. Now these are 3 inches long, and that's fine except for this particular part here. This side panel requires you to go through the wide part of the 2x4, and these screws are not long enough. So to make life a little bit easier, I'm going to be using pocket hole screws. So I'm going to first put the pocket holes in these smaller pieces here, and then I am going to move on to the assembly part of this project. If you're going to use the pocket holes, make sure you use the screws with the blue coating because those are for exterior use.
If you want to build this, there are plans available. The link is below in the description. I will also include in the description a list of all the materials that I'm using in case you want to design your own. I'm marking the location where the second stretcher is going to be going on the top portion of this frame. The second stretcher is important because this is where the bench will be attached to the planter box. Without this piece, there wouldn't be anything solid to bury fasteners into. If you want to build a little platform so you can support a pot, you can screw in the strips now. These strips will allow you to attach the top portion of the platform. I was going to do this and then I decided to do something else. So later on in this video, I will show you what I came up with. Since we're screwing fasteners near the end of these boards, it's good practice to pre-drill holes to avoid splintering. If you're using composite decking, pre-drilling is also going to make it a lot easier to get through this material with the dedicated fasteners. Before you begin attaching the panels, turn the frame upside down. The frame is upside down when the two stretchers that are closer together are at the bottom. It's also a good idea to leave a gap between the boards. I'm using about 1/8 of an inch here. These biscuits are perfect. If you have a biscuit joiner, you probably have these laying around in your shop. I'm going to attach the first panels so that they are even with my tabletop. This will allow me to install all the following panels in a uniform manner on all sides. These are the screws that are supposed to be used for this type of material. To avoid any problems with expansion during the warmer months, I intentionally cut these boards 1/4 of an inch shorter than they needed to be. That way they don't make contact with the perpendicular boards. Also, I do think it's important to mention that if you're going to use the composite decking like I am here, using it in this way is going to void out the warranty. Since it's not really recommended for this type of thing, it's really supposed to be used for decking, for decks, so use at your own risk. Once all the panels are attached, I'm going to use some scrap composite for an underplate. This is going to allow me to raise the planter box slightly off the ground to avoid bottom panels from being damaged when being moved around. Now is the time to attach the top. I'm going to narrow these boards down so I have a larger opening. After cutting one board down to the perfect size, I use it as a template to cut the rest. I found that taping 4 boards and cutting them together worked well. All of the corners are mitered at a 45-degree angle. I cut them long enough to allow for a 1.5-inch overhang on all sides. To position these perfectly, I line up the corners and temporarily clamp them down. Then I tape the seams. Now I can loosen the clamps a bit and reposition all 4 boards so that the overhang is even on all sides. To make this a little easier, I cut some scrap to 1.5 inches and I use it as a gauge. Once the position is correct, I clamp everything down and it is time to fasten it. If you want to get fancy, this is a plug kit which comes with screws, the plugs, a driver, and a 1/8 inch bit. If you're going to use this, you're going to have to make sure that you drill through the thicker portion of the composite. Start by drilling a pilot hole. Then insert the screw. I started using the included bit, but then I found I had better results doing it a different way. Instead of using the installation bit that comes with the kit, drill a 1/8 inch pilot hole. Then carefully use a drill bit slightly smaller than the diameter of the plug to open up the pilot hole to a depth of about 3/8 of an inch. This will make it easier to insert the screws to the proper depth so that the plugs can be installed properly. There is a bit of a learning curve with this, but once I started using this method, I had much better results. This is a 4x8 sheet of PVC. It's 3/4 of an inch thick and it costs a lot less than buying the pre-cut trim. I paid about $140 for this one piece. These pieces are for the planter boxes. They can be glued together with PVC cement. Just make sure that you use the clear cement, not the colored one. I cut these a couple of inches longer to make it easier to glue them down. I'm going to tack each end with my brad nailer and then clamp the middle section down. It only takes a few minutes for this to set. After all my pieces are assembled, I cut them down at my miter saw to final length, and it's time to install. I'm using galvanized brad nails. They do have screws to fasten PVC trim if you choose to go that route instead. There is one last thing to do here before these boxes are done. Instead of building a shelf for plants to rest on, I'm installing 2 rails to hold a 13-inch milk crate. This would allow me to either place a pot right inside of it or line it with some landscape fabric and use it to pot a plant directly. Now it's time to build the framing for the benches. This is a fairly simple process. I'm using pocket holes for the 2 end blocks because it's a stronger connection than screwing into end grain. To speed things up, I cut down 2 spacers to the appropriate length so that each block is spaced out evenly. Don't throw these spacers away because you're going to need them later on in this project. This next part is to make the braces. I'm using 2x6s because I want them to be curved. These are not cut at exactly 45 degrees because I want them to make contact with all 3 rails of the fence. You'll see what I mean later on when I install everything. Whatever angle you end up using, remember that it must add up to 90 degrees. An easy way to ensure that both angled cuts are perfect is to use a Mason square like I am here. Once you have the first one cut perfectly, you can use it as a stencil for all the remaining pieces. This has been my go-to method for getting a nice curve on just about anything. Once I finish the first one, I use it again as a stencil for all the rest. I'm gonna prime and then paint each of these. Keep in mind, if you want to use pressure treated wood for this part, you're gonna have to wait a minimum of 6 months before you can paint it. That's why I decided to use the untreated lumber instead. Now we're ready for the installation. They don't need to be level, but they do need to be on plane with each other. The easiest way that I could think of to get these planed up was to position them and then see what adjustments needed to be made. Some of them were too high and some of them were too low, but after a while they start to set up nicely. By using the pressure treated lumber and the composite decking, these planter boxes are really heavy, but that's a good thing because they are less likely to move or tip over. Working alone means sometimes you need to get creative with the use of your clamps. This actually worked out pretty nicely, and it also allowed me to use my spacers so that I can get each bench spaced out perfectly and uniform with all of the other benches. To attach the benches to the planters, you can use lag bolts or you can use structural wood screws like these. It's time to install the bottom fence panel. These should be lined up with the bottom panel of the planter box. Next up is the installation of the braces, and I realized that they were slightly larger than I needed, so I went over back to the miter saw and I sliced a small piece off the end. Temporarily clamp them down into position. Break out the spacer that we used to build the bench frame and use it to space out the bottom of the braces. Once they're all locked in, it's time to fasten them permanently. It's a good idea to pre-drill everything because the last thing we want to do is splinter one of these braces, especially since I don't have a spare. I'm using a shorter screw here at the bottom because I don't want to go through the other side. Up top, I'm pre-drilling and countersinking each hole and using longer screws. Next, I attach the top fence panel flush with the top of the bench, and then I attach the middle panel. Since I want my spacing to be equal, I use a spacer block to install the middle section. This panel is also important because I'll be using it to secure the braces with one more screw. This is joist tape, and it will increase the life of these frames by shielding it from water. The first decking board that is going to be installed on the bench needs to extend beyond the frame by 1.5 inches, so I made a little jig which will allow me to keep a uniform overhang over all the bench boards. To fasten these, I'm using the same exact method that I used for the tops of the planter boxes, except that I'm using a 3/8 of an inch space between each of the boards. This one last step is to install the PVC over the exposed bench frame. You know it feels extra special when the last thing that you need to do to finish a project completely transforms it. If you want to build this, I do have plans available. The link is below in the description. This has completely transformed the appearance of my yard. I cannot believe how nice it is. I hope you were able to get some ideas out of this one, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. If you do have any questions, please put those in the comments and I will do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you soon.